Every one of us was born here until God reached down, selected, rescued.
Hey everyone, and welcome to today's Explainer. Today we are taking a completely impartial, deep dive journey into the profound and honestly pretty staggering internal logic of a very dense, historic 16th and 17th century theological treatise. Now, right off the bat, I want to be super clear. We aren't here to take sides, we aren't debating the theology, and we aren't pushing a specific viewpoint. Our mission today is simply to map out this absolutely wild conceptual arc that this text presents. We're looking at a timeline that makes a truly audacious claim. It argues that humanity starts out as literal, irredeemable moral garbage, but somehow ends up with those exact same ruined, broken people sitting on cosmic thrones, judging angels. It is a massive, sweeping narrative, and the architecture of how the text gets from point A to point B is fascinating, regardless of your personal beliefs. So, grab a cup of coffee, settle in, and let's explore how this centuries-old framework constructs its ultimate rescue story. Okay, let's dive right into this. To understand this text, we actually have to completely unlearn how we typically think about a rescue. Usually, in our modern minds, a rescue mission implies that the thing being saved has inherent value, right? You think of brave firefighters rushing into a burning museum to pull out a priceless Mona Lisa, or a heroic diver saving a trapped submarine crew. The object of the rescue is precious. But this text, it actively and aggressively dismantles that narrative. We aren't looking at a burning museum full of historical treasures. According to this framework, we are looking at a toxic, abandoned landfill. It's a massive cosmic paradigm shift. You have to realize that the text insists God isn't rescuing a masterpiece that got a little singed in a fire. The rescue is literally salvaging moral refuse. It's scooping up the most polluted, useless sludge imaginable. And keeping that jarring premise in mind is absolutely crucial for understanding everything else that follows. So, here is our roadmap for the journey today. We'll start with number 1, a cosmic paradigm shift. Then, number 2, the anatomy of ruin. Number 3, filing for moral bankruptcy. Number 4, the engine of grace. Number 5, the ultimate legal exchange. And finally, number 6, masterpieces on cosmic thrones. Let's move right into section 1, a cosmic paradigm shift, the premise of complete ruin. You literally cannot appreciate the sheer horsepower of the rescue mission in this text without first grasping the terrifying severity of its diagnosis. The foundational premise here is a concept called constitutional ruin. What does that mean? Well, the text insists that humanity isn't just dealing with a few bad habits or some minor moral hiccups that can be fixed with a little bit of self-help or meditation. No, it argues that the human operating system itself is fundamentally, structurally, and irreparably corrupted from the inside out. Think of it like a computer. We aren't talking about a buggy app that you can just uninstall. We are talking about a totally fried motherboard. The very core of the machine is compromised. The code is entirely infected. Because of this, the text claims the human soul is rendered totally bankrupt before it even begins to try and be good. Every single action, thought, and motive is being processed through a broken, ruined system. That brings us to section 2, the anatomy of ruin, a forensic autopsy.
Let's move to the next logical step and see how this builds, because it gets intensely specific. The author relies heavily on the Apostle Paul's famous indictment in Romans chapter 3, and let me tell you, this section reads exactly like a prosecuting attorney delivering an absolutely airtight forensic case to a jury. Paul essentially puts the human body on an autopsy table and conducts a terrifying, top-down, inside-out geographical descent to prove this constitutional ruin. First, he starts at the top, the mind. He argues the human mind is completely darkened to divine truth. It literally cannot compute spiritual reality. Next, he moves inward to the will. The will isn't free, it is violently, uncontrollably magnetized toward the self, completely addicted to its own glory. Then he moves to the throat and the tongue. He doesn't say people just say mean things sometimes. He calls the throat an open tomb that radiates the stench of decay and says the tongue drips with literal viper's venom. The descent continues all the way down to the feet, which he describes as swift to shed blood, eager to sprint toward violence and destruction. And finally, he brings it back up to the eyes, stating that there is absolutely zero fear or reverence of God in their vision. It's a comprehensive, devastating medical chart of a soul that has flatlined.
Now, most philosophies out there can agree that obvious sins like murder, theft, or cruelty belong on a moral garbage heap. That's not controversial. But this text makes a massive, highly controversial leap by quoting the Old Testament prophet Isaiah, specifically Isaiah 64:6. This is where the text gets incredibly aggressive. It doesn't target our worst moments, it targets our absolute best. It looks at our highest moral efforts, our charity, our philanthropy, our volunteering, the moments we think we are being our most noble selves, and describes them all as filthy rags. And the ancient Hebrew word used here is incredibly graphic. It specifically refers to garments contaminated by ceremonial menstrual impurity. It's not just dirty laundry, it's biologically, ceremonially untouchable waste. The argument is that because the core operating system we talked about earlier is ruined, even the most beautiful-looking fruit it produces is secretly pumped full of arsenic. The motive behind our best deeds is still somehow tangled up in self-interest, pride, or a desire to earn points, meaning even our goodness is polluted. So what does this all mean for the rescue? It means fallen humanity has absolutely nothing of value to offer to earn divine favor. Zero. Zilch. To put this into perspective, I want you to imagine that you owe a massive billion-dollar debt to a bank. You walk into the bank manager's pristine, sterile office completely confident, and you slide a sleek metal briefcase across the mahogany desk. But when the manager clicks it open, instead of bundles of crisp $100 bills, the briefcase is stuffed to the brim with Monopoly money. And not just regular Monopoly money that has literally been dragged through raw, untreated sewage. That is the visceral analogy this text is painting. When we approach God offering our good deeds as payment for our moral debt, we aren't just coming up a little short on funds. The currency we are offering is fundamentally void. It's fake money, and worse, it's contaminated. Handing that briefcase to the bank manager isn't a genuine payment. It is a profound insult. It's offensive. The text insists that attempting to buy your way out of the toxic landfill using the garbage from the landfill is a complete logical impossibility. Let's move right along to Section 3, Filing for Moral Bankruptcy, the required posture. Because the currency of human goodness is totally void, the text argues that God demands a highly specific psychological posture to even initiate this rescue. You have to admit you are bankrupt. This required posture is brilliantly illustrated by the famous story of the Pharisee and the publican. Picture this. The proud, highly religious Pharisee stands up tall. He essentially hands God a perfectly audited portfolio of his spiritual assets. He lists his fasting, his tithing, his flawless rule-following. He is handing over the briefcase of sewage-soaked Monopoly money, demanding a receipt and payment. Contrast that immediately with the publican, a tax collector, a societal outcast, a guy who knows he's the scum of the earth. He stands far off. He doesn't even lift his eyes to the sky. He just violently beats his chest and begs for mercy. He brings absolutely nothing but his total ruin. He offers no deals, no trades, no resume. And the radical conclusion of the text is that only the publican, the one who correctly files for total, undeniable moral bankruptcy, is the one who is rescued and justified. To really, truly hammer this concept home, the text looks back at an incredibly vivid Old Testament story, Naaman the Syrian. If Naaman were alive today, he would be on the cover of Forbes magazine. He has a flawlessly curated earthly resume. He is a 5-star general, a mighty warrior, vastly wealthy, undeniably successful, and highly respected by his king. He's got the corner office and the private jet. But, and this is the massive but that the text focuses on, a giant red marker goes right through his perfect, shining profile with one brutal, unerasable caveat. He is a leper. Underneath the shiny armor and the expensive clothes, his flesh is literally rotting off his bones. He is dying of a terminal, incurable disease. It is the great equalizer. It completely wipes out all his worldly success because all the money and metals in the world can't stop the decay. Naaman is the perfect picture of constitutional ruin masked by human achievement. So Naaman seeks out a prophet of God for a cure. And naturally, because of his status, Naaman expects VIP concierge medicine. He expects the prophet to come out, wave his hands dramatically, perform a grand ceremony, and treat him with the utmost respect. Instead, the prophet doesn't even come to the door. He sends a messenger who tells Naaman, "Go and wash in the Jordan River 7 times. Naaman is furious, absolutely enraged. Why? Because the Jordan River was notoriously muddy and unimpressive. But here is the core logic. God's terms of rescue require the total, public dismantling of human pride. Naaman cannot be healed while wearing his impressive armor. He has to strip off all his medals of honor, take off his expensive clothes, step down from his chariot, and publicly expose his rotting, decaying flesh in a muddy ditch. He has to completely humiliate himself and admit his ruin before the healing can even begin. Which leads us to Section 4, the engine of grace, the unilateral rescue. So, once a soul has filed for bankruptcy, what exactly does God do? What is the actual mechanism of the rescue? The text shifts to what it calls the pure, unilateral engine driving the whole operation. And it uses one of the most intense graphic allegories in all of literature found in Ezekiel chapter 16 to explain it. The story describes a newborn infant, but this isn't a cute, swaddled baby in a nursery. This infant has been violently abandoned on the day of its birth. It is unwashed, its umbilical cord is uncut, and it is thrown into an open field because it is utterly loathed. It is lying in its own blood, completely exposed to the elements, just minutes away from dying. Now think about this infant. It has no latent potential. It cannot negotiate. It cannot ask for help. It cannot do a single thing to improve its situation. It is entirely helpless. But then God passes by. And God doesn't wait for the infant to prove its worth. He simply speaks a single, sovereign, universe-altering word, live. That's it. Just live. The rescue starts entirely with the absolute power of the divine speaker, not with any hidden beauty or potential in the infant. It is 100% a one-way, unilateral rescue mission. Which brings up a massive question. Why? Why would a perfect divine being intentionally reach into the toxic mud for a broken, dying enemy? Why not rescue the strong, the smart, the elite? The text explains this through a concept we can call the mathematics of glory. It's actually a brilliant, calculated formula. God deliberately chooses the weak, the despised, the literal refuse of the world for a very specific reason, to mathematically ensure that humanity can take absolutely zero credit for the rescue. Think about it. If God only saved the strong, intelligent, and highly moral elite, human nature would instantly look for ways to brag. We'd say, well, God did 90% of the work, but I was pretty smart to accept the deal, so I deserve 10% of the credit. This theological framework is designed to systematically crush that instinct to zero. By specifically selecting the weakest, most ruined raw material imaginable, the rescue yields maximum glory for the creator. The equation is flawless. 100% of the credit goes to the artist, and 0% goes to the clay. So the crucial point is how this actually works in a courtroom setting. Let's look at Section 5, the ultimate legal exchange, from condemned to justified. The text outlines the highly specific threefold legal transformation that takes place to change the sinner's standing. Let's break this down using an analogy. Imagine someone buys a condemned, utterly toxic, decaying chemical factory. It's a hazard to the entire city. Step 1 is being washed. This is where the new owner sends in a specialized hazmat team. They scrub the walls, remove the leaking barrels of toxic waste, and sanitize the filth. The immediate danger is removed. Step 2 is being sanctified. The owner goes to the city planning board and literally has the property rezoned. It is no longer zoned as an industrial waste dump. It is permanently set apart and rezoned for an entirely new, elevated purpose, like a botanical garden. But step 3 is the absolute pinnacle, being justified. Even if it's clean and rezoned, a future mayor could theoretically condemn the property again, right? So the owner takes the case all the way to the Supreme Court, and the highest court in the land issues a permanent, irrevocable decree declaring this property an untouchable, pristine historical landmark. It can never, ever be condemned again for all of history. That legal security is what the text means by being justified. But wait a minute. We have a logical problem here. A just and perfect judge cannot simply look at a highly polluted, guilty factory and arbitrarily declare it pristine. That would be corrupt, right? That's where the cornerstone doctrine of this entire framework comes into play. Imputation. Imputation is absolutely vital to understand. It is not merely a pardon. A governor's pardon basically says, yes, you committed the crime, you are guilty, but I am going to waive the penalty and let you go free. Imputation is way more radical than that. It is a total historical exchange of legal records. Christ's perfect, flawless record of absolute obedience is legally credited or imputed directly into the bankrupt sinner's account. It acts as an impenetrable, blinding shield of perfection placed permanently over the individual's constitutional ruin. So when the divine judge looks at the person, he doesn't just waive a penalty. He sees a perfect legal record that demands an inheritance. Justice is completely satisfied, not skirted. This takes us from the cold marble floors of the courtroom straight into the warmth of the cosmic living room. Section 6, Masterpieces on Cosmic Thrones, the Ultimate Destiny. Once that legal standing is secured, the text claims the newly adopted believer receives a staggering cosmic inheritance. And the contrast here is intentional and extreme. Let's look at the former state versus the new reality. On the garbage heap, everything decays over time. The inheritance? The text calls it incorruptible. It is fundamentally immune to decay. The garbage heap pollutes everything it touches. The inheritance is undefiled. It cannot be stained or compromised by evil. The garbage heap inevitably rots away into nothing. The inheritance is unfading. It maintains its peak brilliance forever. Now, importantly, the text acknowledges that the believer still lives on earth and still experiences deep physical and emotional pain, sickness, and failure. But they now live in a secure, dual reality. While their physical bodies might be failing down here, their ultimate core identity is already locked away, absolutely secure, inside an untouchable heavenly vault. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the language used to describe the people themselves. In the book of Ephesians, the original Greek text calls these rescued believers God's workmanship. But the specific Greek word used is poiema. This is the exact linguistic root where we get the English words poem or masterpiece. Think about the sheer scale of that transition. The toxic, leaking garbage heap we started with has literally become a canvas for a divine poem. But here is the genius caveat the text includes. God intentionally places this brilliant, blinding, divine treasure inside incredibly ordinary, fragile, easily breakable earthen vessels, meaning human bodies and flawed human lives. Why? So that when the world looks at this stunning transformation, it is mathematically obvious to everyone watching that the staggering power and beauty belongs entirely to the masterful artist, and not to the fragile clay pot holding it. And that begs the ultimate question. Who exactly is watching this incredible masterpiece being painted? Here the treatise introduces one of its most mind-bending, staggering concepts, the cosmic theater. The text argues that the redeemed human church actually serves as a prismatic, multi-dimensional display being broadcast to the entire angelic realm. You have to remember the lore here. The angels in heaven never rebelled. They never experienced constitutional ruin. They never lived for a single second on a toxic garbage heap. And therefore they never ever needed a savior. Because of this, angels have absolutely no experiential concept of what grace or mercy actually feels like. They only know justice and holiness. So how do they learn about it? They learn about the unfathomable, complex depths of divine mercy purely by observing the redeemed human church. Let that sink in. Redeemed, formerly ruined humans are quite literally serving as the living, breathing curriculum used to teach ancient cosmic angels about the nature of grace. And all of this builds to an awe-inspiring, almost unbelievable conclusion to the text's timeline. It maps out a wild, eternal destiny. We literally trace a path that starts with a polluted, ruined infant left to die and rot in an abandoned, toxic landfill. And the timeline ends with that exact same individual not just sneaking into heaven through the back door, but being crowned, sitting on a cosmic bench, reigning eternally, and actively judging the very angels who've been watching them. It is the text's ultimate flex. It is showing off the mathematically perfect equation for divine glory. The absolute worse the raw material you start with, the exponentially greater the glory and skill of the artist who turns it into a masterpiece that commands the cosmos. So what does this all mean for us today? Let's bring this vast cosmic framework right back down to you. I want you to think about the things in your own life that you consider your personal garbage heap. You know, the deep failures, the hidden shames, the profound weaknesses, the things you secretly assume completely disqualify you from ever being used for anything great or beautiful. Based on the intense, reverse logic of this historic theological framework, what if those things aren't disqualifiers at all? What if your absolute lowest, most helpless, most broken moments are actually the exact required raw materials? What if they are the very canvas necessary for a divine artist to paint his greatest historical masterpiece? It completely reframes how we view human failure. It's a lot to chew on, isn't it? Thank you so much for joining us on this explainer today as we unpacked this incredible timeline. Keep learning, keep asking the big questions, and we will definitely see you next time.